2,000 California soldiers swore an oath to their state. Trump just forced them to break it. The last time American troops occupied American cities against their will was never. California just became ground zero for American authoritarianism, not metaphorically, not rhetorically, literally. As I speak, 2,000 California National Guard troops, soldiers who swore an oath to their state, are now under federal control, deployed against their own communities by a president who's decided that immigration raids matter more than the Constitution. This isn't a drill, it's not a test. This is Donald Trump doing exactly what he promised, using the military against American citizens on American soil. And the spark that lit this constitutional crisis? People protesting ICE raids. But let's be clear about what these raids actually look like. Masked federal agents storming workplaces and neighborhoods, dragging people from their homes and jobs like something out of the Soviet Union. People are literally being disappeared, snatched off the streets and deported to places like El Salvador without trial, without due process, without the basic rights that are supposed to define America. This is the law enforcement that protesters dared to oppose. That's it. That's the insurrection that Stephen Miller claims justifies military occupation of Los Angeles. An insurrection against what? Against watching their neighbours get dragged from their homes, against seeing families torn apart at Home Depot parking lots. Let me walk you through how we got here, because the speed at which this is escalating should terrify every American who still believes in democracy. Friday, the raids begin. It started with ICE agents sweeping through Los Angeles, 2 Home Depots, a clothing wholesaler. 44 people arrested for the crime of existing while undocumented. Protests broke out immediately. Of course they did. What else do you expect when federal agents start hunting human beings like animals? Saturday, the escalation. By Saturday, the protests had spread. About 100 people faced off with law enforcement in Paramount and Compton. Some rocks were thrown, 1 car was set on fire, some protesters waved Mexican flags. That's when Stephen Miller, Trump's pet white nationalist, saw his opportunity. Insurrection against the law sovereignty of United States. Insurrection for throwing rocks, for waving flags, for daring to say this is wrong. Look, even with there being damage, insurrection is one hell of a word to use. Meanwhile, Dan Bongino, yes, the FBI now has Dan fucking Bongino as deputy director, threatened protesters with federal prosecution for assaulting law enforcement. The groundwork was being laid. The narrative was being written. Protesters weren't civilians exercising their First Amendment rights, they were insurgents, enemies of the state. And then Sunday happened. Trump didn't just threaten, he acted. With zero consultation with California's governor, he federalized 2,000 National Guard troops under Title X authority. Here's what he said. If Governor Gavin Newsom of California and Mayor Karen Bass of Los Angeles can't do their jobs, which everyone knows they can't, then the federal government will step in and solve the problem. Riots and looters. The way it should be solved. The way it should be solved. Military force against American protesters. That's Trump's solution. But it gets worse. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, the Fox News host turned Pentagon chief, went even further. Under President Trump, violence and destruction against federal agents and federal facilities will not be tolerated. If violence continues, active duty Marines at Camp Pendleton will also be mobilized. They are on high alert. Marines, active duty Marines against American civilians on American soil. Governor Newsom's response said it all. The Secretary of Defense is now threatening to deploy active duty Marines on American soil against its own citizens. This is deranged behavior. Deranged. That's the polite word for it. What Newsom is really saying, what any sane person watching this unfold understands, is that this is the behavior of a regime that's abandoned even the pretense of democratic governance. This is what happens when the people in charge view their own citizens as enemy combatants, when the military isn't for defending the nation, but for crushing dissent. When the Constitution becomes toilet paper for an administration drunk on its own power. Here's what makes this so damn dangerous. Trump didn't even bother invoking the Insurrection Act. He just took control. He used some obscure Title X authority to commandeer state troops without the governor's consent. Commandeering a state's National Guard without consulting the governor of that state is illegal and immoral. Illegal. Let that word sink in. The President of the United States is illegally deploying military forces against American civilians. And why? Newsom laid it out perfectly. The federal government is moving to take over the California National Guard and deploy 2,000 soldiers. That move is purposefully inflammatory and will only escalate tensions. LA authorities are able to access law enforcement assistance at a moment's notice. We are in close coordination with the city and county, and there is currently no unmet need. You see, there was no crisis, no breakup of order, no request for federal help. Just Trump manufacturing a spectacle to show his base how he's tough on immigration. Monday, the madness continues. By Monday morning, LA was quiet. The insurrection had fizzled out. But Trump wasn't done. Really bad, LA. Bring the troops. He's commanding military forces. Illegally. Meanwhile, Stephen Miller, the architect of family separation, the Muslim ban, and every other cruelty this administration has inflicted, showed us exactly what this is really about. He called LA occupied territory, said we should take back America, accused Mayor Bass of siding with criminal invaders. Occupied territory, take back America. This isn't law enforcement language, this is language of ethnic cleansing. Let's be crystal fucking clear about what's happening here. This isn't about protecting federal agents, they have their own security. This is about establishing a precedent. It's about normalizing military deployment against protesters. It's about showing that if you stand up to Trump's agenda, he'll send soldiers to crush you. Today it's immigration protesters in LA. Tomorrow it could be environmental activists in Portland. Next week it could be voting rights activists in Atlanta. Once you cross this line, once you establish that the president can unilaterally deploy military forces against citizens, there's no going back. We're watching the playbook of every authoritarian regime in history unfold before our eyes. First, you create a crisis, in this case the immigration invasion that exists only in Stephen Miller's fever dreams. Second, you demonize protesters as enemies, transforming citizens exercising their rights into insurrectionists threatening the state. Third comes the deployment of military force, which is exactly what we're seeing in Los Angeles right now. Fourth, you normalize the military presence until armed soldiers of American streets seem routine. Fifth, you expand the definition of what constitutes a threat until anyone who opposes you can be labelled the enemy. And sixth, democracy dies. Not with a bang, but with boots on the ground and citizens too afraid to speak out. And you know what the most infuriating part is? At least it's one of the most annoying parts as far as I'm concerned. The same people who spent years screaming about government overreach and states' rights are cheering this on because they never had fucking principles to begin with. Because when it's their guy doing it, when it's against people they hate, suddenly authoritarianism is patriotic. J.D. Vance called the protesters insurrectionists carrying foreign flags. You know what's actually insurrectionist? Illegally seizing control of a state's military forces, using the federal government to override state sovereignty, threatening to deploy Marines against civilians. But sure, the real threat is people waving Mexican flags. Governor Newsom is suing. He's formally demanded Trump rescind the deployment. We didn't have a problem until Trump got involved. This is a serious breach of state sovereignty, inflaming tensions while pulling resources from where they're actually needed. Rescind the order, return control to California. But lawsuits take time, and while lawyers argue in courtrooms, soldiers patrol American streets. This, right now, is the test. This is the moment where America finds out if their democracy has any antibodies left, or if it's going to sleepwalk into fascism while debating whether it's technically fascism if he didn't invoke the Insurrection Act. Because make no mistake, when the president can unilaterally deploy military forces against protesters, when he can override governors and occupy American cities, when insurrection means whatever Stephen Miller says it means, that's not democracy anymore. That is something else entirely. And if it doesn't get stopped now, while there's still time, Americans are going to wake up one day and wonder how they let it happen. But we will know exactly how. It happened on a Sunday in June, when Americans shrugged and said, well, they were throwing stones. It happened when immigration enforcement was deemed more important than the Constitution. It happened when fear overrode freedom. It's happening right now. The question is, what happens next?